This video is to show you how to assemble the outside portion of your bag, the main shell of the bag. So you can see here that I've got my bag front piece. This is the piece that I already applied my pocket to in a different video. So I have that all ready to go. I also have over here the matching back piece. So this should be the same size pattern piece right there. I will need that in a minute, but first I'm going to attach the pieces that make up the bottom and the sides of the bag. So these are the same pieces as you used in the strap previously. It's all the same pattern size. And like the strap, you're going to start by putting the two short ends together. So you can see that I've pre-sewn the very first step, which is putting the short sides together, right side to right side, sewing that seam at 1/2 inch, and then ironing it open. This makes one long strip, just like you did previously in the strap. The next task is to line this up with the bottom of your bag. So the basic way that you can find the center or the bottom of your bag is to obviously fold it. It's symmetrical. You can line up the corners and then find the bottom of the bag, and you can mark it with a pencil. You can put a pin in it, however that works for you, but you do want to find the center of the bottom portion of the bag. And mine is just a hair off from the pattern. Ooh, that's going to make me crazy. So I'm going to line this up. I tried to get my pattern to line up in the center, but it's off by just a tiny bit. So I'm going to line up this seam with that center mark in the bottom of my bag, and I'm going to go ahead and pin that. Then instead of being tempted to start pinning the rest of the bag and working my way up the sides, I'm going to go ahead and pin the top sides first. And this will make sure that I am not stretching anything out of place, and that I will get to my goal, which is the top edge of the bag. This is a really important step in many methods of construction, to find places within the pattern that match up and mark, and then pin end to end, and then go back and pin everything else in between. You're going to get a better fit, more even distribution of your pattern piece that way. I'm also going to match up the opposite side. I'm going to go ahead and pin that. Now, my next task is to pin the rest of the bag. And I want to pin everything that I know is flat and even and matches up together well first, before I attack these curves. The curves want to be the very, very last thing I do. And I actually have a whole separate video on this that I did previously, where I basically just do a corner of this bag and I'm applying one strip to the corner. This is just applying it to the whole bag, but the same theory applies. So everything that's straight, so before the curve starts until about here, I'm going to pin nice and straight, and then I'm going to skip over my curved edge, avoid that, and I'm going to pin everything that I know is nice and straight here on the side. Then I'll go back and attack my curve. So this is really dividing and conquering, getting everything to match up well, and then working on the tricky part. If you work on the curve first, then you might find you have excess fabric once you reach the side of the bag, where it really should be flat and even. You don't want that to happen. So the technique that we're going to use when we do stretch our straight fabric to fit our curved fabric, or we're actually going to stretch the curve a little bit to fit the straight fabric, is called easing. And so you'll do this in many construction applications. in which you have slightly different curves, or you have one piece that's curvier and one piece that's straighter, you're going to be gently stretching them to fit each other. So you can see here that it looks like I have way too much fabric in my side piece, but really this curve in the corner is much more flexible because that curve is on the bias of the fabric. It's where your grain is actually at a diagonal. So if you find the center of your corner and then gently stretch in between these pieces, you can get them to fit together. So I'm putting a little tension between my fingers and holding that tension as I pin, and then kind of moving, releasing that tension that I put on it. And really, you're trying to get these pieces to fit together. And it's not so much that the outer edge fits together, so much as the inside part, about a 1/2 inch in where your seam allowance is, that fits together, because that's where you're actually sewing. It takes a little bit of practice to get the hang of this, but you'll kind of see some bumps and ripples. Those will go away as we sew, because we will also stretch it just a little bit as it goes underneath the sewing machine. So now I'm going to work on the opposite side in the same way. I'm going to go ahead and pin everything that I know is straight, and that should match up appropriately, everything that's easy to pin together, and then I'll go back and attack that curve in the same way. So this is probably the one of the more labor-intensive, longer portions of assembling the bag. It takes a little bit of patience to get this done. So you'll be applying this side and bottom piece to the front of the bag. Then you'll also be doing the same thing to the back of the bag for the outside bag. And then you'll repeat all of the same steps for the lining portion of the bag. So the lining bag goes together exactly the same way. So once you've mastered it and you've stretched the curves on the outside of the bag, then the lining should go together a little easier once you've gotten a little more practice. Okay, now that I've distributed all the fullness elsewhere, I can go back and I can start to stretch this corner into place. And I'm really stretching a little bit more on this portion, the front portion of the bag, than I am on the side portion. Because I get more flexibility in the curve of that piece. So you can see I kind of bend and flex those pieces, hold the tension between my fingers as I pin, and then release. And again, as I sew, I will do the same thing. We'll hold the tension there as I sew. Okay, now once I've got my pins in, I'm ready to start sewing. I'm going to zoom the camera in here so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to start at the upper right edge. Again, maintaining my 1/2 inch seam allowance. And everything that's straight is pretty easy to sew. You don't really need to worry about stretching anything. You can just zoom right along and sew this pretty easily. When you do get to the curve is where you want to slow down and take your time with it. Okay, so now I'm approaching the curve. The key to easing as I'm sewing is to keep my hands on it at all times. I'm putting one hand behind the presser foot and one in front of the presser foot, so I can pull this a little bit taut as it goes under the needle. So I'm smoothing it out with that same little bit of pressure, tension that I did when I pinned it, and that will help keep everything smooth. So yes, it's challenging, but if you take it slowly and you guide it through gently, you should have pretty good results. Okay, and once I've gotten through the curve, then woo, I'm onto the easy part again. Here's the straight, where I can just zoom right along, no problems. And then I'll have to slow down again as I approach this next curve on the opposite side. So I will go slowly and stretch just a little bit as it goes under the needle to ease this into place. Okay, and I got through that one too. So here we go, finishing it up. And then we'll have to double check and see that we got good results. Go ahead and clip your curves, and you can remove your pins, and you want to take a look at what you sewed here on the curve. My phone is jumping with the machine as it slows down, but you just want to check your curve that you didn't accidentally fold or put a tuck in it. That is almost a little bit of bump, but I can kind of stretch that out. You don't want the fabric to fold